Hi, everybody. I'm registered dietitian Myrna Haig. These podcasts are about empowering you with impactful, science-backed nutrition. So what I try to do is offer information that will help you in not just balancing meals, because I'm all about understanding how that works, but about what we're doing with our bodies in nutrition in general. It's going to take us to our most optimum self. Tonight, I want to talk about nutrition from the standpoint of what's going on in the brain. Because I think food addiction, a lot of us, we don't really always think of food addiction, because a lot of times we think if there's food addiction, it must mean that, we have some real problem, or, most of us don't think of food really controlling us. But as far as obesity is concerned, food addiction is probably the biggest date. It's really what's going on as far as getting messages to eat, really to overeat. Food addiction, when the brain switches from a normal food intake to where the body has these regulatory systems, that when we're just not hungry, when we had enough, we should be able to just have our appetite turn off for us. But there's such a thing that the brain takes over, and it makes it really tough. And a lot of times we're made to believe that it's all about willpower, and it's kind of this self-fault, that we just don't know how to push ourselves away from food, and we really get low self-esteems over it. And what I find, it's really not the case. There's chemicals involved, and we can turn these switches off. So when we think about food addiction, we're really talking about reversing obesity and obesity-related diseases. There's 3 ways this works. The cues, liking it, I really like ice cream. But with cues, what is really going on in the brain? That's what we're going to talk about tonight. Can we just really like something, like I have my comfort food, and then be done with it? Is there a way that we can have willpower? Is there any one of these areas where willpower is just useless? The answer to that question is yes. When we're looking at cues, liking it, there is this expectation of reward. There are small comfort feelings. There are small releases of dopamine, and we'll talk about that. Even the smell of the food, the thought of it, maybe when you were a kid, mom made something a certain way, and just the thought of that brings back really good memories, sort of this pleasure. You do get little hits of dopamine, but the cues where you're liking it is very different than the chemical trigger of wanting it and needing it. And I think really understanding what's going on in your head is huge when you're trying to figure out how to reverse obesity. Because we all know you can be given a diet. Come on, the keto diet, this diet, that. I mean, just follow the diet, for God's sakes, and you're going to lose weight. And that's probably true in most cases, right? But then why can't we stay on the diet? It's because something goes on in the brain. And when we get to the place of these chemical triggers, these are messengers, these are peptides, these are hormones that get triggered. And you go from liking to needing and to wanting. There's a major drive and motivation for behavior that makes it almost difficult to say no to food. And this is where the muscles, insulin, and gut bacteria come into play. Quite honestly, been doing this for over 2 decades, read a lot of research, and it really comes down to these 3 areas and understanding how to balance them to where we can turn off the chemical trigger. I want it, I need it. And if all we're having to deal with is the cues of the stimulus, these are easy, folks. And I'm going to talk to you today where these cues hit the brain and how we can reverse them. And when we get into the needing, into the wanting, then you're going to go into food addiction. And I want to make something really clear, because we're going to talk about the brain. We're going to show you the patterns tonight. Food addiction only happens when the brain actually gets the food, okay? But the torture chamber can be right here in the chemical trigger. The actual place of trying to get yourself to where the food, the desire for it, right here, this is the one that can be the torture chamber, the chemical trigger. What I refer to with food addiction is the obesity cycle. It's when you get into that place where you can't seem to turn off the chemical responses, where the behavior and the addiction, it all kind of leads to this cycle. And this is where most of us fall when we're rolling into getting off our diet and, oh, I'm off the wagon and I just keep gaining weight. We're into this cyclical approach, to eating that seems to keep us trapped. This food addiction. You want it so bad, you just can't stop. What is the difference between like versus need and want? I call it about the top-down approach, but a lot of other scientists call it that too. And it's the control, the conditioned responses, the top-down. It's when the brain is taking over the appetite, and the brain can do that. The balance down is what I refer to when I talk about the balance, when I talk about what we're dealing with in the Lean Life program. Teaching you how to eat so that the body doesn't have the going from the cues and the likes to the actual needs and the wants. And what this study talks about here is ability to resist the urge to eat requires proper functioning of neuronal circuits involved in the top-down control to these opposing conditioned responses. This is what predicts that reward from eating the food and the desire to eat the food. Imaging studies show that obese subjects might have, and we're going to talk about this, might have impairments in these dopaminergic pathways. These are some chemical pathways we're going to talk about that regulate the systems of reward. This thing that the brain falls into that makes it really tough to stay away from food, even when we have signed off that we're going to follow a diet. And really, is the Myrna method program that I'm teaching you, I mean, is it somewhat of a diet? I guess in a way we could say it is. I like to think it's a way of teaching you to eat so you don't have to fall a victim of this brain wave of food that keeps you trapped. What's also interesting is obese people have more impairments in the condition responses. So let's talk about these condition responses. The brain circuits other than those regulating hunger, because there are other regulatory systems for hunger. The stomach has hormones called ghrelin. When you get hungry, really physiological hunger, when you actually need nutrients, we have feedback loops from the neck down that tell you, hey, you need to eat nutrients. You eat the nutrients, everything seems to be fine. It should turn off when you get done, when you're full, when you have everything you need, but something goes wrong. And what goes wrong is that people don't understand how muscles work, insulin, gut bacteria. When we don't understand that there's other needs from the neck down, that if we're not balancing with food, create chemical hits that will take you upstairs in the brain into this addictive place of eating. And it's about a reward center, and it's about a motivation, a drive, and this emotional regulation of food that becomes really tough to turn off. So when I think about this addiction, and I think about, let me see if I can get my pen up here, guys. I'm going to try to see my pen. Here we go. When we think about the brain chemicals and what happens when we're eating from a place of no turnoff switch, I call it, no, the addiction, cravings, the cues versus the wants, versus eating from the neck down. So when I talk about eating from the neck down, if I could teach you to eat in such a way that the muscles, the insulin response, the gut bacteria, these areas are totally satisfied, you naturally will eat less. There will be no addiction. Cravings are gone. That's what the Lean Life program is. It's about teaching you to eat foods that create a satiety from the neck down. What we're going to talk about tonight is what's going on from the neck up. When we look at the brain, we have the circulatory system. These are neuroplasticities that we create. It's what they call the learning, the conditioning, the neuroplasticity in the brain. And the reason this was designed is kind of interesting, is so that when in the wild, when you would learn a certain behavior, the body would set up a circulatory system so you wouldn't have to keep learning it. It was kind of like a response system. So that, if you like getting in a car, perfect example for today, in today's terms, you get in a car, once you learn to drive, you're sort of on a path that's just natural, a natural path. You get in, the body sort of goes into the system of knowing what to do. If you were in the wild and you knew that if a lion roared, you went down this pathway, you went down this road, you went up this tree, or whatever it is you learned to do to get away from the wild beasts, well, it didn't take relearning it. The body would fall into these natural patterns, these learned conditioned patterns. Then the body made a pathway, this neuroplasticity. It literally made a neuronal pathway so that you didn't have to keep learning it every time. Your body would remember it and just do it. Natural. When the lion roars, you know you're doing that behavior. When you get in the car, you automatically know how to drive it. So what happens is that we develop these all through our life. And food, we have them already set in. So we develop this neuroplasticity for liking food. This is our learned condition. We like it. But we have receptor sites, dopamine receptor sites. We actually release a chemical when we feel good called dopamine. And these dopamine reward centers sit on top of this learned behavior. And respect to food, which is what we're going to talk about tonight, we have these little reward centers that sit on this neuroplasticity, this learned behavior. And what happens is when we eat certain foods, the body clicks into this reward center. And it's really tough to get off this pattern of hitting these reward centers and going back to this neuroplasticity. It's almost like you eat within the pattern of the brain. And there is no turn-off switch here. And there's certain cues, certain things that you smell food or you remember that you like, and you right away go to this neuroplasticity, where the body says, boy, you know you like that food. Boy, you know you like that ice cream. But what drops you into the addiction is the actual food, the actual drive you get to click into these reward centers that turns on the desire to keep eating. And the key here is that sugar and fat, these are the main triggers. They promote eating. They promote this learned association. And why it was developed that way, it goes back to evolutionary times, when the body knew that if we had sugary food, it was going to be the ripest food. If you hunted an animal and it was, a healthy animal, it was fat, and the body said, man, make sure we clean out the field of those ripe, sweet, delectant fruits. So the body turned off the natural regulatory system from the neck down that said, oh, I'm no longer hungry, I'm satisfied, because all the nutrients were met. And the body said, heck no, we're going to go up in the brain and we're just going to keep rotating from this circulatory system, and we're going to hit these little reward centers, and the more and more you eat, the more and more you want. And that's when you're into this brain chemical way of eating, where there really is no turn-off switch. We've all been there. This is when it goes beyond the cues. It goes to the one when you actually get the food on the reward centers. And this is the biggest key for me is it's going to actually take the food to trigger in the cyclical way of eating where it's really tough to turn it off. It actually takes the food to turn it on. But man, the neuroplasticity, the cues that get you thinking. The expectation, the reward, this can turn on a little dopamine, but you're still going to only be in the conditioned area. And this is what's really interesting about just being in the learned area, is that the brain can only typically go down one circuit at a time. It's kind of like how the brain works. So if you're thinking about something right now, you're following one path, one neuronal path of thought. And the brain really can't do more than one at a time. So if you're thinking of things you like, and there's no real desire, there's nothing that's been hitting this reward center, there's no stimulus that actually turned it on like fat and sugar does, but you're just thinking about it, you're just going down one pattern, but you didn't really blow up the addiction yet with the food, you can change that by changing your thought. You can train your brain because you know you like it. And so what that means is if we're thinking of one thing and we change our thought and we think about something else, we no longer think about this. We're now on to this thought. So whatever you liked seems to just kind of go away. Oh yeah, that's right. I was thinking about liking the macaroni and cheese 5 minutes ago, but now I'm reading a book or thinking about something else because it's just a condition. And to me, that's a beautiful thing because it means we can recondition our brain. Once you're in food addiction, good luck with that. It's really tough. Once the sugar and fat hit these reward centers, then you just keep going and going and going. And then it's like, oh, I know, I love it. I want it. I want it. I love it. I'm eating it. I love it. I want it. You just rolling in this triggered response and cues. Cues are all about sitting in the stimulus, but it takes the food to really engage in the cycle. Now, what studies are showing is that obese individuals seem to have a more hyperactivation of the response of food stimuli. And I want to talk about that a minute. That makes sense to me. Because to be obese, they're caught in an obesity cycle. Let's all be real, right? How much of that is really coming from the triggers of muscle, insulin, and gut bacteria, and then they're really just developing more neuroplasticity? Because when you read the studies, they don't distinguish that. They don't do the Myrna Method Lean Life program. They don't even distinguish the difference between the wants and the needs and the cues. It's just all one big hot mess. It's just one all big hyperactivation. Well, we already know when you're in the obesity cycle, it's a trap. It's tough to get out of. And we know that when you're in binge eating, when there's all this high level of dopamine, the stimulus can trigger you to want more because you like it. But do we really know from these studies, are these people in a need place? Do they have both going on? And this is what my research has shown me. That in most of the time, both are going on. But so few people talk about balance or talk about the things I talk about that is just one big bag of addiction. But addiction can actually be separated out. How do I know this? Because I've been doing it for several decades. And I read studies and I look at how addiction works, how these brain chemicals work, and how food works. So the stimulus, it does hit the circulatory system, of course, I mean, yeah, you can be thinking about it, but you also can think of something else. You can think about macaroni and cheese right now, but then now your husband's talking to you, your wife's talking to you, somebody's, and all of a sudden they got something interesting and you start thinking about that. Because you can't think about both at the same time. But if you actually had an imbalance, you won't be able to stop thinking about it. And that's the biggest line in the sand. I'm never going to remove the idea you like something. Come on, people. Of course, you're going to have neuroplasticity built in because you already did that behavior once in your life. But the thing with brain and the thing with these neuroplastic pathways is the more traveled, the more you go. In other words, the more behavior you set up, the more you basically build out these to be paths well taken. But at the end of the day, you still need the sugar to hit the addiction to where you can't come back. You keep rolling and rolling. So once you hit these dopamine receptor sites with this fat and sugar, you just keep wanting more. You know, you like it, you like more, you eat more, you want it. And the other thing that's really dangerous when you fall into this is that you need more every time. And let me find that slide because I'm going to come back to it, but I'm going to jump there now. Is this addiction doesn't just happen. It actually takes the food to trigger the full-blown addiction. And the problem is the more you do it, the more you need. And it decreases your dopamine levels overall. So we keep a certain baseline of dopamine that makes us happy, right? Because dopamine is sort of the happy drug in our brain that floats around. But when you're on this fat and sugar kick, the body hits above this happy center and then comes down. And then eventually when you keep doing this, it needs more and more food to hit what used to create happiness, takes more and then more. So the more binging you do, the more it takes to reach the same satiety of that happy feel-good feeling. But the bad part about it is the further down you go below baseline. So this is depression. You actually drop at a lower level of happiness with food binging when you're eating from the brain. So people who are obese and are kind of falling into this pattern inevitably will have some form of depression. Why is that? Because it's the chemical nature. It's the chemical nature of this, which is what makes this so difficult. Because when you're in this obesity cycle, you will be trapped into continuing it because you create more neuroplasticity, more learned behavior, more stimulus. And the studies show if you're obese, you have a more impairment. You're more trapped. And then there's other hormones that keep you trapped. It's really a hot mess. It's like the heavier you are, and it's crazy to think of it this way, but the harder it is to try to get leaner. And the reason I say that is because you end up following a diet. It's typical, right? And what ends up happening is you may lose weight, but you never figure out how to fix it. You lose the weight, you struggle, you do what you have to do, and it is a struggle. But you can still, in some regards, be following this brain problem, this addiction. Maybe you're controlling it. Maybe you're on a diet that's helping you. Maybe you're on Ozempic, right? Because Ozempic does block some of the dopamine centers in the brain. Let's talk about that. That's why everybody's doing it, because it blocks these. But you're going to have to get off the drug eventually. So that's one of the reasons why everybody's on Ozempic. because it helps block some of these dopamine receptors in the brain so that hopefully you don't keep following this pattern that the brain takes you up in. The key is when you're just getting cues, guys, we can change our thought and change that. And that's the difference when it's not coming from a chemical addiction. And the chemical addiction is when your carbs are too low. And I talk about this in my videos. If you're on this Wednesday night stream, Tuesday night is when I dedicate all to balancing. But when your carbs are low and your glycogen is low in the muscle, a neuropeptide is sent to the brain. That's a peptide. It's a messenger. When the hormone insulin, you don't know how to eat the carbs, there is going to be a message sent to the brain. When gut bacteria is not where it should be, when you have more bad gut bacteria than good bacteria, when you're not eating to create a healthy gut, again, peptides, bacteria sent to the brain. These are chemicals. These create a need. It's not a cue, people. It's not a cue. It's a need, and it's a want. So you go from liking to where it was somewhat controllable to being in a full-blown, I gotta have it. If you could remove this, like I said, I can't remove the like. I can't really get rid of the neuroplasticity. But man, what a difference we can make when you don't have chemicals bombarding your brain. And these chemicals create this drive and this motivation for that fat and sugar. And once this gets into the brain, once this sugar gets into the brain, that's why I talk about its 4 areas, people. Understanding how these 4 work is everything to reversing obesity. Because once these hit the reward centers, then you are going to be doing this full addiction, what I call hedonic form of eating, where you're up into the brain, and the more and more you eat, the more and more you want. And a lot of people, this is where they live. They don't even know that all these things down here that they're unintentionally doing because they don't know how to eat are dragging them into a cycle of really abuse where they're eating constantly from the brain. Brain driven. Cues, the like to, the stimulus, the learned behavior, we can unlearn the behavior to some extent. Body driven is so different than that. And those that have been on the Lean Life program and really understand eating the way I recommend, they all say, yeah, you know what? 2 meals into this, I get it. I know what it's like to be in this body-driven, physiological, I eat because I'm actually hungry. I don't have to stop eating at 6 o'clock and God, don't eat till noon the next day. Like, what is up with that? That actually can drive you more into an addiction because the body is going to be having some imbalance. When you're balanced, what I'm really saying is there's no chemical trigger. There's no mayhem. There's no need. There's no desire. You're not like dying to have it. I know you like it. Okay? But this can be real fickle when you're in that because, oh, yeah, so what are you talking about now? But when you got this going on, you can't stop thinking about it. So not being balanced creates this chemical need. You got to keep it out of the brain, period. And when you're in this place of eating from the body, oh my gosh, the regulatory system is super easy. And when people tell me, oh, I don't know what's wrong, it's not working, I can find one of these areas, then you're off. Like some of my athletes that say, oh yeah, that's right, I forgot. I'm exercising 2 hours a day. I guess I'm depleting my glycogen. I need to understand how to balance those carbs, Myrna. Okay, let's go there. Let's do that. We do that, done. Seriously, because this person maybe eats fiber, or maybe you're somebody that doesn't understand how the gut bacteria works. Okay, let me explain it to you. You got to have a certain amount of fiber, and you have to have certain varieties of fiber. But if you get that right, fixed. How about insulin? Oh my God, let's talk about insulin, because that's the biggest hog mess we got going. That's where everybody's having either tripped over. That's this insulin resistance. And yes, I talk a lot about that, because understanding how that works is everything. Understanding that if you don't know how to balance your carbs, and these carbs are rushing in the system, and you have insulin and you don't know how to balance your fats, and you have all these ceramides, which is what my course is all about, heck yeah, you're going to get into brain problems, because you're going to have all this sugar in the blood, and you're going to have an excess amount of insulin. And whenever you have a lot of insulin, it triggers the brain to eat more. These are chemical triggers. It's not about liking or, oh, I smell food. I'm thinking about mama and the days she made her macaroni and cheese. Oh, I really remember that. That's nice. I like it. That you can survive. This you cannot. You can't. It's really tough. It's really tough to try to ignore these chemical triggers. When the glycogen level in the muscle gets low, this has to do with carbs. How many diets are people on low carb diets? And why are they on the low carb diets? Because they have a problem over here with insulin, because nobody's actually taught them to eat. And all of this leads to the brain chemicals. So really the takeaway tonight is I want you to realize this neuroplasticity that goes in the brain, and that you're okay if you like it, and you're okay with cues. And yes, cues will trigger a little bit of dopamine. That's okay. You have good thoughts. It's until the fat and sugar hits your lips, hits the brain, you're going into the addiction, into the cycle. But if you're off in these areas, really tough. This creates that wanting and that need. So if you're really going to get rid of obesity forever, which is the goal, you have to make sure that we don't trigger these brain chemicals. You have to understand how to eat for this, how to balance your diet. So this is what takes on. The key is that you have to lock into the idea that this is a lifestyle, and you're figuring out in little pieces at a time with the nutrition information. Everything I'm giving you with the Lean Life is, how do I get the body to naturally regulate my appetite? Because honest to God, if you could turn the switch off that said, I don't want to eat, that's the ticket, guys. The ticket isn't, is it a keto? Is it a paleo? It's, what do I need to do chemically to get the brain to where I don't want to eat? Because if you don't want to eat, that's what Ozempic does. It's a drug. It blocks it. You don't want to eat. I'm not telling you to follow a diet or, oh, we're going to just drug you up there and block that little receptor. Well, we have ways that we can get the body to naturally do this. That's what I'm so passionate about showing people, because it works. Now, a lot of peripheral things going on too, right? So we got other things we got to think about with nutrition. And that's what Wednesday's about. Talking about these little things and looking at the fact that if we don't understand all these pieces, it's going to be tough to do this. I don't think you can. Look at it out there, guys. It's an epidemic. Obesity isn't a choice. Is it really our fault? I don't think it's our fault. Not when I'm explaining to you these chemical triggers. I believe people just don't know how to eat. And the most critical areas that I have found through my research, through treating patients, is what I'm explaining to you tonight. Is if you're eating from the brain, which most people do when they get into that addiction, you can't turn it off. You're going for a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Next thing you know, it's like, oh my God, I did 2 little Hershey Kisses, and then there was a little bowl of cereal, and then it was this, and then I couldn't say no. It was four plates of food, and then I was just stuck in this cycle of all I think about is food. And there's a way to turn it off. So the way you turn it off is you first learn about these areas. Okay. Tonight we talk about the brain. And these are the macronutrients that are going to do it for you. Very simple. The app tells you this is where we want you to keep them for your daily goals. And then every meal, we got to keep these guys, shut them down, shut them down. It's a chemical, shut them down. Because if you never go to the brain to eat, you don't really want to eat. Hunger's not an issue. There's physiological hunger. There's the hunger that's true hunger because you need nutrients. And then there's this chemical hogwash that goes on, that where you actually get depressed from eating because you drop yourself because of the dopamine hits that food's bringing you. And I'm not even talking about binging, okay? I'm talking about just more and more food, more pleasure that you're getting from food, constantly hitting this dopamine, constantly working from that brain feed, leads to depression chemically. It drops you below baseline. And the areas that change it from cues to wants, muscles want carbs, guys. Muscles want carbs. And when muscles don't get the amount of carbs they need, they tell the brain, I want carbs. That's a chemical messenger. That changes the brain to a need and a want. But remember, it takes the sugar and fat to turn it into a full-blown addiction. And then you're going to have neuroplasticity. You're going to develop more and more pathways. That's why studies are showing, right? Studies are showing with obese patients, they have more neuroplasticity built in. Well, duh, I didn't need a study to tell me that. That's common sense. Because the more and more you do it, the more and more you create this neuroplasticity. Common sense. And it's an entrapment. And how do you get out of it? You get out of it by understanding there is a way we can eat that creates balance. You're not going to be on this train ride. You're going to be on this train ride. And this is the one you want to be on. You're still going to like it. You're still going to have the neuroplasticity. But the need and the desire and the trigger, the obesity cycle goes away. 4 areas that do that. Some people are new, so I'll go into it a little bit. Muscles want carbs when you get depleted. At the end of the day, the body says, so if you're a big guy, right? You're 6'4", 6'2", you probably need 250 grams of carbs a day. Let's say you're 4'11" or 5 feet, you might need 150. On average, I would say most of us are between 180 and 200 grams of carbs a day. And every time you exercise for an hour at the gym, let's say you went easy, but let's say you went hard, it's going to be an additional 30 to 60 grams on top of that. And muscles don't care about anybody else but themselves. And muscles say, well, if you don't make me happy, I'm going to send a messenger to the brain. And you know that macaroni and cheese you like, you're going to want it bad. You can't get off that train ride. And then what happens is insulin basically gets released every time you eat a carb. So now you have to learn how to balance your carbs. You can't eliminate carbs like a lot of people say, well, why don't you do a low carb diet? You can't do a low carb diet. I just told you why. Muscles aren't going to work for you. They're going to have you binge. But if you don't know how to eat these macronutrients because you have too much fat in your diet, or maybe you have too much body fat, these fats begin to release into the bloodstream and they go up into the muscles and they actually clog the receptor site where insulin's trying to tell the muscle to let sugar in. This is all in my course. Bottom line, you have to know how to eat carbs. You can't eliminate them. You can't go on a low carb diet because you're going to really want the carbs. You're going to need a cheat day. Anybody that says to me, well, every diet says you need a cheat day, I go, well, that's a problem. That's a real problem. There's never a cheat day because you get to eat whatever you want. You have to balance it. So what happens with the carbs is you have to be able to slow them down into the bloodstream, which is why I teach you how to eat carbs and combine them in the meals with protein and fiber. Why do I do that? Well, I know you need fiber, period, certain amount, but I know protein and fiber can slow down the release of carbs, which means insulin is going to be slower, which means the brain isn't going to be turned on to want more carbs. Because when insulin is raging in your blood, it sends a message to the brain, more carbs. And that's a real problem if you have a cue and you're smelling the food and you remember mama's cooking. It's going down. You're going down. This is the impetus. This is the thing that triggers it. You got to know how to eat carbs. You got to know how to eat fats because it'll be a big problem. Fats will cause the insulin problem. You got to know how to eat fiber. You got to know how to eat. And addiction, food addiction, if you're just going off the cues, it's a piece of cake. It really is. I mean, you're going to get little dopamine hits, but it's easy to control. If you're not balanced, you can't control it. You can't. Because you can't get rid of the likes. Fiber creates chemicals, huge for the health, but it also creates good bacteria that keep balance and stop manipulating the brain for bad food. What is craziness is gut bacteria can manipulate the hypothalamus and can actually dictate a certain addiction paradigm. Now, listen, it's not the gut bacteria that actually does the addiction. It takes the food to create the cycle. But it's a trigger that creates the need and the want. So if you don't get the microbiome right, these bacteria travel and they can influence the brain homeostasis. They can create hedonic regulatory. And when they talk about hedonic, that's pleasure eating. All that means is you're going up in the brain and you're creating that cycle of more, got to have it. That's when they refer to the hedonic regulatory mechanisms. And these bacteria can influence that. Why is that? Well, they believe that certain bacterias, surprise, surprise, from processed foods, create a biodirectional feedback system where the body wants to continue with those foods from a bacteria message, gut bacteria. So we find that these little microbes have their own little game they play in your head. Wonderful for that. So if you go from a liking, you can grow into a wanting and to I gotta have. And why in the heck would the body ever do this? Dopamine was triggered. This system where the appetite could be turned off was because we didn't have refrigeration millions of years ago. We didn't have a system of preserving. We had to eat it when it was available. The body had to turn off the system that would control our appetite. Remember, if we take out your appetite, you would die of starvation. If I had a mechanism where I could literally turn everybody's appetite, or somebody says, turn it off, boom. If I could do that, it would be a very serious problem. They would have no motivation to eat. And we're busy people. They may go days without eating. If there was no motivation, if there was no feedback loop, if there was nothing creating hunger, if there was no desire, or there was no drive to eat, there'd be a failure to thrive. You wouldn't make it. And that's what happens with dementia, right? When people get dementia, they can have their brain chemicals off and they can literally go without eating, get super thin, right? Because that turns off. So the key with really reversing obesity, because that's why you're here, right? You want to be on this lean life program where your body can do all this. The root cause of obesity isn't have anything to do with weight gain or weight loss. That's just a symptom. It's really just not knowing how to properly eat, creating feedback loops that trigger you into an appetite obsession with the brain. Really tough to turn off. It's much easier to control the likes. You can do learning behavior. You can change your behavior. And the brain can only travel down one thought pattern at a time. So you can be thinking about macaroni and cheese and think about something else. As long as we don't have the needs, we don't have the chemical messengers, making it impossible to think about anything else. So what are the ideas to alter cues? Because once you stay balanced, then it's just alter your cues. Okay, brain activity. Okay, reading will help, watching TV. Sorry, not a lot of brain activity there. So yeah, cues could be turned on there, I suppose. Moving does the same thing, staying busy. These alter the cues. Once you do 6 weeks of a lot of cue altering, then it can actually change your behavior. You'll have less neuroplasticity, just less behavior, less paths to well-traveled. You can alter that. So it's easy to do the cues. It takes a little work, I guess. But it's still, I guess, part of addiction because you give into the cues. Anyways, I hope this helped tonight. I wanted to leave it open for any discussion or if anybody has any questions. Hopefully this was helpful. I do put these on YouTube, Myrna Method YouTube. You can go there. You can like, comment, tell me what you think. You can open the mic if you want to talk about it.
Hey, Myrna, can I just introduce everybody to Victoria Bates, who's joined us tonight. She's a neighbor and friend of Pamela and mine, and I'm delighted to see that she's here. So I wanted to say welcome, Victoria.
Yay, Victoria. And I know for her first night, she's probably going, what is this all about? So I actually talked to Victoria and get in, watch the videos. It's a way of eating. And that's what we do here is we teach a way of eating that reverses obesity, but also makes us healthier too. There's a lot of other really good benefits. And food coach Karen says, welcome, Victoria. So you can always get a hold of Karen, as I showed you on the center, the Myrna Method Membership Center. And she's awesome. And she loves to hear from you guys. Any other questions? Anybody want to share any experience on anything I said tonight? If it was like, yeah, no, I've been there, or
well, Myrna, a couple things. First of all, when I worked with Karen, it was very, very helpful because she taught me how to navigate the app. And that almost becomes fun. It's kind of I don't play video games, but I could imagine it could be like that. But if I want to figure out, if I have an idea about what I'd like to eat, I'd put it in the app, or I am just building a meal. I put that in the app, and it's like, yeah, like ching, 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 ching. Yes, it balanced. So that's helpful. And Karen was wonderful walking me through that. So I make good use of her. And the other thing is the cravings. John and I are quite surprised by how the cravings have left our lives. And that he noticed it right away. And I noticed it in a bit, but it was subtle. But when I look back at what I was craving and when and what, how, it's very different from the way we are today. And that's a great release. It's a great feeling of freedom. It's like I have chocolate cake in the refrigerator and I'm not thinking about it.
Right. Yeah. And
Yeah, that would have been different a while ago.
right. And I so appreciate this discussion because it makes it real. Because I feel like I lecture all the time and I'm like yelling and telling people. But what you said, Pamela, was so key because you didn't realize what was going on. You know, it's kind of you like chocolate cake, you know, you like it, but you didn't have chemicals that were triggering it to be this cycle up here. You weren't eating from your brain. You're not eating from your brain anymore. You're
Yes,
eating
that's
from your
true.
body.
That's
Yeah.
true. And it's palpable. You can really feel that.
Yeah.
Pamela is as some of us know, a marvelous cook and baker, and the things that she creates would be delicious, and you could sort of just scarf down a whole pound cake. I mean, you could do that watching an hour television show.
Right.
But what happens, and the truth is, I've done that. My God, for years. But the truth is, you can take a piece of that and taste it and think that, wow, it's very good. But then
Right.
all you want is a bite or two. You don't cut off half the cake
Right.
and go walking away into the den with it. I mean, it's you just don't have that. You're not being driven. You don't have that. That storm of energy pushing you along like a current that just overcomes it just takes you where it wants you to go. That just dissipates, and it's a wonderful relief. There is a freedom, there is a real liberation in that.
Yeah, and thanks, John, for that, because it's absolutely, to me, with my research and treating patients, it was like the Holy Grail when I really discovered this is crazy. And by the way, guys, I backed it up with a ton of research and over 1,000 patients that this was like worked every single time because it's based on the science. So why would you want to do anything else with your life as an RD but teach this? Because it changes lives. The big key for me was wow, if I could really get people to get rid of this, it's like taking Ozempic. But the difference is you're actually doing it yourself without the drug.
Yeah.
Once you get into the food addiction, it's all over, right? So it's kind of like when you cross that bridge, I guess you sort of have this out of body experience and you go, okay, yeah, I'm screwed. I'm totally eating from the brain right now. But I think there's freedom in that as well, because how many of us felt like when we were at this place that we felt like it was us, like we were just, and I don't want to, probably not nice to say, but we felt like losers. Okay, let's just be honest. We felt like, oh my God, like I don't understand why I can't say no to the whole pound cake, right? I know. So why can't I just have a piece of pound cake? And when you go here, you can't come back. It's almost like you got to just get it over with, right? Everybody know what I'm talking about, right?
There's an old saying, which is, bet you can't eat just one.
No.
Yeah.
and,
And
and now you understand it better.
and Patty says, spot on, John.
Thank you, Patty. Yeah.
Karen says, thank you, Pamela. I'm glad you feel good with navigating the app. Karen's awesome. And Sammy says, we did record some new tutorials. So I'll take you guys there. And Patty says, thanks so much, Myrna. It's truly cool that when you do balance, you really don't get hungry. You feel satisfied and maintain your body's natural state. I know it from experience, and I thank you so much for having such passion and teaching this. The whole world needs to know this. And Patty is a registered nurse, so she does know a lot of the science. So, yeah, I mean, it's food addiction is, I think, the big culprit, but it's not because we're food addicted because we don't know how, we have no willpower. And I think that's the big thing I see a lot too, is that we tend to believe that we are in this situation because we are lazy or we lack willpower, or we're uneducated, or we're too busy, because we have to ask ourselves, why are we overweight? We don't really ask that question. We just always say, I gotta lose weight. I gotta lose weight. Everybody comes, well, I want to do your program, but I gotta lose weight. I gotta get all the weight off. Or, I'm not into learning any of this. I just want to get the weight off. But the bottom line, that's the biggest trickery going, is you have to learn it, because there is no other way. There's no other way, because you're just going to lose weight and you're just going to gain it all back.
Myrna, I think of it as food is fuel. When you eat balanced, you don't want to overeat, and you really actually feel great. You feel in control. And at times when you are in addiction and you think food is fun or drink is fun, it's so short term, and it really isn't. So that's why this is amazing, and I love that you taught me about it, and hopefully others will learn, because when you are humming along and your body's balanced, I mean, you're really a different person.
Yeah. And I always say, truthfully, we do so much with our lives. I mean, it's about the intellect and it's about the spirituality, but if you don't get this down, nothing else is going to happen. If you don't figure out how to run this rocket ship you're living in, you're not going to get far in any other areas. Because you know what? I'm going to tell you, if you're sick, that's all you think about. If you have a problem or you're low in energy, you don't have the motivation to do all the wonderful things that you're destined to do, because your body is not allowing you to do it. So for me, it's like, gosh, I think we should have hundreds of people doing this, right? I think it should be like, everybody should say, yeah, I got to do this because I got to reverse obesity. I want to be my healthiest self. Yeah. And I do love the fact you say food is fuel, but if you tell a foodie that, and Pamela, I love, Pamela, you're a foodie, right? I mean, Pamela's a foodie because she cooks it, she lives it, she loves it, she enjoys it. I mean, food is a celebration to her. So as a foodie, a lot of my foodies are like, oh my God, she's saying, I mean, but does it make you a better foodie?
It makes me a healthy foodie, and it makes me very confident about what I'm doing when I'm I mean, this threw a whole wrench into my happy little program. to change the way I do things. But as I said last night, I'm still a foodie, and now I'm working on creating recipes that are fabulous but are balanced. And that makes me feel really good when I'm sharing things with people.
I know. Isn't that true? Because once you know this, even if the people you're feeding don't know it, you sort of feel this spiritual goodness about yourself. I know that's kind of dorky.
Now it's like a moral responsibility, you know?
Yeah, I know.
I can't do that to you. I love you.
I know, right? It's kind of like, oh my God, trust me, I just like did so much good for you. Yeah, I do feel that way as well. That's really cool that you feel that way. So if anybody else wants to share, love it, love it. Or any questions? All right. I will see you next Tuesday.